And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. It is a dark, dark place in a dark, dark mountain in a dark, dark temple at the bottom of a set of dark, dark stairs where this week the worst video game mechanics go to die. Sorry, Cultaholic, for ripping you off, except I'm not sorry. It's not ripping off, it's paying homage. But yes, I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have three of my good brothers here. We have the man who has used up more blood than Elizabeth Bathory for his Geist the Bloody cosplay. Good brother Slick Rick.
I personally want to thank Zarnia Enterprises for the donations for the restock I needed.
Zarnia Enterprises holds none of that in any sort of capacity. We provided him solely with red paint. However, as per the contract and bill of sale you signed, any side effects of using the red paint are solely at your own risk and discretion, and we hold no liability.
Don't worry, it's locked up in a room where it is sterile and will be used appropriately.
We have the man getting you through all of the works of manga dubbing throughout the YouTube universe. I'm going to do a better job at that one next time. Good brother Shades.
Yes, and I think some of these game mechanics will be getting a paid visit from the torture sommelier.
And the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises welcomes you into our new training program. Come join us, and you may even get to see exactly how our paints are made.
And of course, no, we both the monastery and Zadari Enterprises do not endorse the hiring of so-called detective agencies to deal with stolen quote unquote stolen property.
That's exactly right. If Zadari Enterprises is going to reclaim their stolen property, we'll do it ourselves with our fucking mecha. I don't need no stinking infamous detective agency that did union busting in the 18 and 1900s. I can do it myself, thanks.
He takes union busting to a whole new level, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want to fuck with this guy.
The only thing you ever want to do is get a nice front row seat, some popcorn, soda, and watch the chaos as someone wishes they never angered this man.
I'm so good at union busting, I even broke up the Wonderful 101.
Moving right along.
Yeah. So this is the first in a on again, off again series that I am calling the Polyhedral Purge. If any of you have seen Straight to Hell from Cultaholic or Room 101 on the BBC, you'll have a bit of an idea of what's in store here. The idea is we are taking the worst tropes, motifs, and whatnot from various media and deciding whether or not they get to live or get sent to hell. And for the first one, we are doing video game mechanics, and I know some of you might have some ideas on what this is going to entail. You're probably ranting about certain ones already, but we need to set the record straight on one thing in particular. And for this, I'm going to let Shades take over on a certain rule that we're establishing right out of the fucking gate when it comes to this particular episode.
Indeed. Brothers and sisters of this fine temple, allow me to clear up one thing for you. When we talk about video game mechanics here, we are strictly referring to internal mechanics. And let me explain. When it comes to video games, there are two types of game mechanics that most people are aware of. There are internal mechanics and external mechanics. External mechanics are stuff that are not in the actual gameplay. They are part of the game, but you don't actually play the game using those mechanics. You use them to add to the game. This is stuff like, DLC, any kind of additional content, unlockables perhaps. Oh yeah, let's not forget everyone's personal favorite, good old loot boxes! Yeah, we're not talking about any of those tonight. We're going to be talking about in-game mechanics, stuff that you use to actually play the game.
Jumping,
stuff like
climbing,
combat systems.
Killing.
Yeah. Combat system, puzzle mechanics, save systems, things like that. That's the kind of stuff we're going to be looking at here tonight. So keep that in mind going forward. If you mention loot boxes in this chat tonight, you will have to be flogged.
Yeah.
And to be completely specific, I know that some people are going to say, well, you didn't mention it in the list. The list is non-exhaustive, because I know that he mentioned as an internal mechanic save systems. But if any of you bring up buying save slots in Metal Gear Survive, I'm going to bitch slap you with a 50-meter tall mecha.
What are you talking
I ain't gonna stop him.
Zam, what are you talking about? Everyone coming in here has full-heartedly agreed they're going to become test subjects for your newest project at Zion Enterprises.
I'm not Zaya, I'm Zadari. Thank you very much.
Zadari, my apologies.
Yes, Zaya, we absorbed them. He has that half right. It's just like we absorbed God Kuroto Dan, but that's a different story. He's just funny. We like him around the office.
He does some good programming too, but yeah, you don't want to compare Zidari Enterprises to Zaya. No.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. But again, everyone in the chat here who breaks a rule, they have signed the paper in blood, I might add, that they will be your next test subject.
Second reminder, I'm a mod in the chat, so I will take that as an agreement.
Yeah. But now, with that in mind, some of the ones that we'll be talking about aren't ones that are going to show up in more recent games. However, you all should know that one, a grudge is eternal until it is righted. The Book of Grudges does not suddenly vanish the grudges written in its pages. And two, those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Now, with that in mind, there's one that I knew I wanted to bring up, especially given recent events. Let me talk about weapon durability. The mechanic you see so often in a lot of survival games, which Mandalore has referred to as cursed runes. The mechanic that you see quite a bit within some survival horror and some survivalist games. The mechanic you see in some CRPGs, but more prevalent to this, the mechanic that has kept me from getting fully in bed with Breath of the Wild and its upcoming successor, Tears of the Kingdom.
Let me preface this, Monk. Certain game types, such as those survivalist games, especially things that are post-apocalyptic or are zombie-based, maybe, making a durability system for your, not just your weapons, but everything. Because most of those games have durability on everything. Just look at Fallout. Durability for your weapons, your armor, everything else. Those systems make sense in the fact that it's part of immersing yourself in that world, that particular world. It makes sense that you'd have to repair these things. It also makes sense to give a choice to consumers on whether they want to experience that or not. While Fallout New Vegas still had durability was fairly easy to repair, but it also had the hardcore mode that also had you manage, your sleep, your water, your food for even more immersive experience. The issue that I personally take with weapon durability is when you put it in a system where it doesn't make any fucking sense. And the big issue with Breath of the Wild, I can't speak for Tears of the Kingdom since it isn't out yet, was even the Master Sword fell under that system. I would have had no problem with the fucking durability system in Breath of the Wild if the Master Sword as your backup had been infinite durability.
And yes, I know some of you are going to say, oh, well, it does eventually recover itself. That doesn't change the point.
30 real-time minutes. It's 30 real-time minutes before you can use it again.
Yeah, and considering how much work you have to do to get the fucking thing, you'd think you would get you would get rewarded by having the infinite durability. You have to work for that fucking thing, getting 16 fucking hearts for you to pull the fucker.
13 hearts is enough.
It's been a while since I played the game, but you got my point. You have to get 13 fucking hearts to pull the fucking thing. You should get rewarded for that.
Yes, and let me add on top of that, the Trials of the Sword DLC increases the damage of the sword. That's nice. And decreases the recharge time. But it doesn't eliminate it! If you get the 13 hearts to get the sword, and sure, maybe the sword hasn't recovered fully from being blasted by Calamity Ganon and all the robots, and so, yeah, it has to recharge between uses. I can almost accept that. Not really, but I'll give it a pass. If the Trials of the Sword DLC had made it so that when you go through all of the trials and finish them all the trials of the Master Sword, that it has infinite durability, I would have no problems at that point. You did work to get yourself an even stronger Master Sword with infinite durability. But it's not even infinite!
Mm-hmm.
And We've seen that weapon durability is back in the Tears of the Kingdom gameplay trailers. That apparently by fusing items together, you can extend durability, because I remember that they had really low durability with the tree branch, but then when they fused a rock to the tree branch to make a club-like weapon, it had way more durability than the original tree branch did. But that's a stopgap.
That's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound.
It's lipstick on a pig, as Monk so often likes to say.
Oh yeah.
And I've seen some argue that this kind of thing is present so that people don't rely on one particular weapon all the time. Except there's a few problems with that. One, there isn't the need that would be all well and good if the three types of melee weapons that you have access to actually had some reason to be the way that they are. You know, some sort of rock paper scissors thing would be perfectly fine. No,
Yeah, if spears were better than long swords against certain enemies, and long swords and broadswords were better than claymores against certain enemies, and claymores were better than spears, that would make a little more sense.
Yeah. You know, say swords are fast. Great swords have super armor, and spears have reach. It's obviously that's not a perfect setup, but it's an improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this isn't just like this is just specific to Breath of the Wild, but there are other games that have weapon durability that don't fucking need it. I'm gonna say it. This is gonna be a really old and deep cut for all of you in the '90s. Diablo.
Oh yeah.
Why? Well, because it's a looter. No, fuck you. Why? Or, hell, let's go back to WoW as an MMO. Why? Because it's a gold sink. Okay. The fact that you have to create gold sinks is an entirely different issue. It's still stupid. I mean, if we look at it, there's durability in Final Fantasy XIV's equipment. And it's also technically a form of gold sink. It's dumb. It's busy work. It does not actually make the game better, and only exists to make the player do something other than what they think is fun. But then, let me go to a good contemporary example. Demon's Souls and the Dark Souls games. Equipment all had durability. Sure. I'd like to point out that Elden Ring did not. Either FromSoft has learned that the durability thing really isn't fun and doesn't add to the game at all, or maybe it was just specific for Elden Ring, I don't know. If they make another Dark Souls game, a Dark Souls 4, and it doesn't have durability, I'll call that a confirmation. But you didn't have durability in Sekiro either, even though Sekiro is a vastly different designed game for vastly different things. They still could have put a durability in the game if they really wanted to. But FromSoft hasn't in recent games, and they're definitely not going to in Armored Core. I mean, the durability is, if your durability runs out, you die, but that's different.
And there was a game some years ago called The Cursed Crusade, which had weapon durability. But the reason why I don't have an issue with weapon durability in that entry is because of the fact that you are constantly going to be switching weapons throughout the levels. There's also the fact that in one of the encounters you end up starting at a disadvantage because you pull the broken weapons and have to essentially play at a handicap for a minute until you kill the people with the better weapons and get to use those. Cursed Crusade was kind of jank, but at the very least, its idea of you constantly switching your weapon loadout is still intact. Now, with that in mind, the one big one that I've talked about quite a bit that I feel should also get purged is hand braking.
Explain, please.
Zan, since I let Shades be the evangelist for setting the record straight, I'll let you be the evangelist for hand braking, since I've explained it to you a bunch of times.
And I already understood the mechanic as was. Hand braking, and to those of you wondering, it is not B-R-E-A-K as in breaking your hands, it's B-R-A-K-E as in a handbrake on a car, is a part of a game where it is not even easily clear on what your next step is. Some people have called this something like Star Tropic Syndrome, but that's technically wrong as well, because all Star Tropic Syndrome is you have to talk to every NPC once before you can progress. This is for those games where the mechanic that you're supposed to do isn't obvious, and there's really no way to make it obvious. The trope that I most often point at when he says handbrake is guide dang it.
Yeah,
Where the thing is so hard to find out or intuit on your own that you eventually resort to a strategy guide or an online forum, someplace that helps tell you what to do next.
Yeah. A lot of adventure games, especially 90s adventure games, were notorious for this. The big example, and this is the one that Shades had put up, is Death Mountain in Zelda 2. Because unless you had Nintendo Power, you were going to be lost.
Unless you had Nintendo Power.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, unless you had Nintendo Power or do what I did and used graph paper.
Yeah. You had to either map it yourself or look up a guide. And you can even go back to the original Legend of Zelda. Some of the hints that they dropped made no fucking sense on trying to find half the shit.
Oh, yeah.
I think part of that was translation issues, especially for the original Zelda. But I know that something I did not only with Zelda 2 and Death Mountain, but also with the original Link's Awakening. I used graph paper to make maps to see where I had found things like pieces of heart, and again, in the case of Link's Awakening, the seashells, to know places I had already gotten stuff from and not to retread them.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, I know that with some of these, people will argue, well, where you're supposed to figure it out. But the problem with these is that I'm perfectly fine with figuring it out. It is when the solution is one where there's no reasonable way you could, unless you had some sort of foreknowledge. I'd also be remiss if I didn't point out one of the more infamous puzzles in Castlevania 2. You know, the one where you're supposed to crouch at a very specific spot at night so that a tornado will come by and pick you up.
Not just crouching at a specific guy, but also holding a very specific item. Because you're supposed to hold the red crystal in front of this very specific spot near a mountain wall that you can't pass through otherwise at night in order for the tornado to appear to take you over. There is no clue that you're supposed to do this anywhere in the game.
How about we describe something that is a meme at this point, but that and is a meme because it was back when Ego Raptor was good. Dude, you're supposed to get Meryl's codec code from the back of the box. Well, how the fuck am I supposed to know that? You have to talk to Colonel. You know how many people didn't codec talk to people in Metal Gear Solid unless it was a story scene? Or unless they had to save?
Yeah.
There you go!
Mm-hmm. There was also even though I appreciate it in some forms and appreciate what it was trying to do. Hexen. Let's talk about the 7 portals.
No, we're done. I'm done. No.
Yeah, I've suffered that fate. I've played that game.
I think I'm glad because I'm pretty sure I skipped that one.
You dodged a bullet, son.
The thing is, on a technical level, Hexen is really damn good, but the combination of not knowing where to go and those fucking Edens showing up every few minutes ends up souring me on the game. Hexen 2 I don't have as many problems with, except for the fucking were jaguars. You know, the ones that say, "No, you will not be doing damage to me right now."
And then I'm going to bring up one of my personal deep cuts when it comes to hand-breaking / guide dang it. The entire game, Legend of Mana.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why, people?
Shoot.
Well, first of all, it's not the fact that there is a non-crafted ultimate weapon you can get by having a save game of Saga Frontier 2 on your memory card that you then have to go to a save point, highlight, and then go to a different area, fight a pretty hard boss to get the weapon. Or the fact that you could have a Final Fantasy VIII save game on your memory card to get a specific pet. Oh no, that mechanic is not anywhere in the fucking game! In the manual! Anywhere! Not even in the Japanese! Or, maybe it's the crafting system itself. Because that crafting system is convoluted as shit. And you have to do tons of trial and error to understand how the elements work on your crafting to get the types of fruits and shit you need and all that other fucking shit. No! You know what it is, Monk? You know what it is?
What?
The entire game is a collection of 70 fucking side quests. And if you want to do a 100% run hitting every fucking side quest, where there are conditions like, oh, you can't have this quest active right now, or you can't have completed this quest, or you can't have set down this specific artifact to create its map icon yet. And the map icons have to be set down in a specific way so that all of their elements align properly for you to do all of the fucking missions! The entire game is a goddamn it!
Breathe, boy, breathe!
Yeah.
Damn, Zan, tell us how you really feel.
But
oh no, I love the game. I love the game. It's just the whole game's a goddamn it.
yeah. And truth be told, a good amount of the Saga games that are guilty of goddamn it moments, and a good amount of the Mana series is not far off. Along with some weird things like the tree is your mother.
Oh, God.
That's only Secret of Mana.
That's only Secret of Mana. However, I'd like to throw out an offshoot of goddammit games that has long since been forgotten, but for those of us old school gamers, we remember very well. And I'll sum it up in 2 simple words: Moon Logic.
Yep.
Anyone who's played King's Quest have heard those 2 words and are shuddering in their chairs right now.
Yeah.
King's Quest or Monkey Isle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any of the early Sierra era games are hearing those 2 words and going, "Oh God, no!"
Yeah.
For those who are younger and have not experienced this pain, the idea behind Moon Logic is basically trying to solve a puzzle or quest using items and mechanics that you would never consider to be compatible with each other. Like, you take, throwing a pie down a well to suddenly summon a demon. That's a random example, but that's literally how random Moon Logic can get sometimes.
Or let's use a fairly good puzzle game series, the Professor Layton series.
Oh.
Let's just go to the first game, Curious Village. One of the puzzles talks about a device that puts a hole in pieces of paper and then marks the hole with a line. And most of us wouldn't think of how that works.
I think that's like a hole puncher or
Well,
Or something like
it
that.
draws a line. It marks the hole with a line. Okay.
yeah.
So what do you think of when you hear a line?
Ruler.
Just be a
You think of it as it being straight.
yeah.
But the answer that the puzzle is looking for is a compass, as in the little hinged piece of metal that has a stylus on one side and a pencil on the other to draw arcs. It's a hole marked by a line.
Which once again, that is ridiculously obtuse. I will admit, King's Quest has been my whipping boy for years when it comes to this. As much as I love Myst and Riven, I never played Exile, so I can't comment on that. They are guilty of it. I'd say just about every major adventure game, in the point and click variety is guilty of it to some degree. I'm not counting the stuff that Telltale had put out, because by that point, a lot of their, aside from Sam and Max, a lot of their stuff was doubling down on story instead of puzzle. That is typical of adventure games. Putting aside the Sam and Max stuff, and this is especially
Hell, Sam and Max was almost Sam and Max was practically a parody of the whole thing.
Yeah. I will admit there is one game that can have moon logic moments, but I feel like that's part of the joke, and that is the Stanley Parable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the joke. The Stanley Parable is itself an entire parody on these types of games.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there's moon logic to get something, it's a parody of that too.
Which is the reason why I can't count it.
All right.
I will also say the big problem with this kind of thing is the way to make a game fun is by rewarding people for coming up with their own solutions to obstacles. But when the solution ends up being pigeonholed into this one thing that has so many different steps, you don't feel like you've accomplished something when you finally figure it out. You feel like you were just throwing shit at the wall and something finally stuck. It's not I got through the puzzle. It's, oh god, that thing is finally over.
Yeah, it wasn't fun.
Mm-hmm. I was tempted to bring up slide puzzles, but that's more of a me problem. The slide puzzles are not compatible with the way my brain works.
By slide puzzles, do you mean puzzles where you slide around stuff until they stick in holes, or the 15-number slide puzzles?
More the former.
Okay, yeah, I can understand why. I don't know, works for me, but not for thee. It all happens.
Yeah.
There is one. When you did the rant about Legend of Mana, there was one infamous ultimate weapon in a console-style RPG that came to mind, and it's specifically from Final Fantasy XII. How could I not talk about the Zodiac Spear?
Oh boy.
That one is absolute goddammit.
For those
Four chests that you cannot open until you get the Zodiac Spear. There's no indication of which chests it are. There's no indication that you'll lose the spear if you open them. There's not even an understanding of that. You literally only know about the Zodiac Spear disappearing from other people who have told you. Because if you went through that entire game, opened every chest as you came across it, and then never got the Zodiac Spear, you did it all in a vacuum. Nobody ever talked to you during the entire thing. You'd never know there's a Zodiac Spear in the game in the first place.
And the thing is, that is not only is that the most powerful weapon in the game, but it's one that completely ignores the license system.
Mm-hmm.
Which there are only two other weapons in the whole game that do it, and those weapons are story specific. That being the Sword of Kings and the Treaty Blade.
Mm-hmm.
And the spear is basically a win is a borderline win button because of its attack stat. But since we brought up difficulty, this is as good a time as any to bring up difficulty spikes. Now,
It really depends on the type of difficulty spike. A lot of difficulty spikes can be really good. I'm going to use the Monster Hunter entire franchise as an example. You can go through many hunts in low rank, and then in certain games, you'll hit maybe the flagship monster for that game, or maybe just a really intense monster. And it'll test you, and it'll tell you either your equipment or your skills are not good enough for this. Go back and do more. And it's meant to be that checkpoint to let you know, hey, you're not prepared.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also bad difficulty spikes out there.
What I'm referring to as a difficulty spike is when the smooth curve upwards that a game is ideally supposed to have ends up making a massive jump. One of the earliest examples I can think of was Whitney in Pokemon Gen 2.
Ah, the Miltank of Doom.
Yes, you know exactly where this is going. Now, if you know she's coming, Whitney is perfectly manageable. I mean, she's only got 2 Pokemon to her name. Granted, and one of them is a Clefairy, so who cares? But since when it comes to difficulty spikes, we're dealing with that first time experience. The pre-planning doesn't mean shit. And as Shades had mentioned, the big thing that makes it a spike is that fucking Miltank.
For those who have never battled this notorious gym leader, her Miltank comes with Rollout. A move that basically it endlessly repeats until it is blocked, and every time it successfully attacks, it gets stronger. So, and she has ridiculous luck with this thing too. So odds are good, no matter how high level your Pokemon are, there won't be long before she can one-shot your strongest without even trying.
Mm-hmm. Again, if you know what you're doing, it's manageable, but that doesn't matter for this.
Better have something that kills normal types quick.
And that's the reason why normal types can be tricky at the early stages, because there isn't really the only obvious type advantage is Ghost, and good luck finding a Ghost early on. But I would say, obviously, I already mentioned Death Mountain in Zelda 2, but that's a classic example of difficulty spiking. It is tricky to bring up games in the NES era when it comes to difficulty because, well, Nintendo Hard is a thing.
Not to mention, like, during that time, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that around the time that a lot of the developers back then still had the mindset in terms of programming the difficulty of the arcades?
Some of them did, yes. There was definitely a case, and there was also this is something I've heard about, and this wouldn't surprise me, is that especially that some games actually had their difficulty tweaked for US releases for the rental market.
The big thing was, and this is especially the case with third party, was you were only allowed a certain number of games per year. And the number varies, but it's less than 10. So the mindset was make it as hard as it can to make so that people don't just play it once and then return it.
Well, and also for stores like Blockbuster at the time, which often did have a video game section, make those games hard as hell so that you could have to rent them longer, thus spend more money. If you guys thought these money-making tactics weren't a thing back in the 90s, you are fooling yourselves.
Oh yeah, people will find a way no matter what.
Uh-huh.
And now on the screen you'll see the checkpoint marker from the Genesis era of Sonic games. I had asked that one to be put in because one that is a pet peeve has always been checkpoint distribution. Because usually the idea is you have a checkpoint set up after you're safe from an encounter or after you've made a significant amount of progress. Some games will have it where they have checkpoints spread way too far out to the point where you end up losing like half a level's worth of progress if you end up kicking the bucket.
And I can tell you this, it still hasn't gone away, especially today.
Yeah, that's one of those mechanics that still can sometimes be an issue. Though, once again, Zelda 2 becomes our favorite whipping boy for this because there were next to no checkpoints in that fucking game. If you could get all the way to just before the final temple, and if you die there before that, you go all the way back to the very beginning of the game.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in some cases there's been this is why people would eventually abuse save states. And even though it's not as much of an issue anymore, we all had to deal with the personal hell of passwords.
Sorry, Mega Man.
Oh, yes. Now, I think we should address this because some could argue that password systems could be counted as external mechanics, but it's not quite, because while you do have to go into an external menu to access to use the password, you gain it to save your progress internally. So, gray area.
Mm-hmm. It is borderline as hell, but it's still a gray area.
No, it's definitely an internal mechanic because there's one major game that I have to look at and call it my pet peeve. Hi, Golden Sun and Golden Sun 2. The password to take everything you had from Golden Sun 1 to Golden Sun 2, you had to get the longest version and you had to copy it down perfect. And you had to input it perfect to make sure you got all that stuff from 1 to 2.
I think that would actually be more argued as an external mechanic for that particular game.
No, because you need to have at least the base password to have any of the Jin from the first game. You can't. It's a password that you have to get any of the genie from the first game.
Well, let me ask you this, Zan. Could you play the game without it?
Possibly, but I don't think you could beat it.
It's a case of this is heavily debatable here, but I would argue that's still considered an external mechanic for that particular game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, those were my big entries when it comes to this, and I know I avoided it, but obviously when it comes to difficulty spiking, yes, the big example is going to be the turbo tunnel in Battletoads. You know,
He just didn't want to talk about it.
That bad, Monk? Not that bad at all.
Popcorn shades?
Oh, please pass it down.
No, there is a difference between incompetent design and incompetent game mechanic design and outright evil. Evil is when you have things that are going to annoy you, but it's done by developers who know better and are doing it anyways. Because
Yeah.
Battletoads lures you in thinking it's going to be a TMNT-like beat 'em up. And then Turbo Tunnel happens and you realize that is not the case. And you are actually in for a hellish platformer.
it's fitting that the level that the turbo tunnel is based on looks very hellish in design, because that is basically like you literally go down. Level 2 is literally you descending into hell. It is outright telling you this is your last moment of peace, because you are about to experience pain.
Mm-hmm.
Because after halfway into level 3, the difficulty spike shoots up to the max and doesn't let up.
Many people have destroyed copies over this.
Yes. If you need any examples to how bad Battletoads is after level 3, I would highly recommend you go to Proton John's channel and watch the 4-player race that him and his buddies did, and just watch the suffering unfold. All 4 of them curse this game's existence before even the halfway point in the race.
Oh.
And that's with them using warps.
I pity you if one day you end up doing commentary for a Battletoads race.
Believe it or not, for a speedrun race, those guys have the mechanics down. They have done speedruns of Battletoads.
Oh yeah, and well they've done worse stuff like the everybody let's play of Kaizo.
Uh-huh.
Which is where we got the whole thing of move faster, Pokey.
Move faster, Pokey!
I'm moving as fast as I can.
Clearly not enough. But
All right.
I've occupied a bit of it with my particular entries. Shades, I'd like to see what entries you had in mind, because I'm pretty sure you've got a few spicy ones.
I got to think about this now, because I actually didn't. Because I didn't have. I honestly wasn't even sure if I was going to join tonight, to be honest. And now I realize, I should have thought of shit.
I have. Let me go, Shades, because I have one.
Let Rick have this one for now.
All right, Rick, what do you got?
Everyone, we have, in some way, shape, or form, we've all complained about this. Pace breakers. Those have always been my thing, because you know these type of ones. These could be any game you're going. You are going at either it's for story reasons or just gameplay reasons. You are going at a certain pace. Everything's going at a certain way, and then you either hit that one mission, that one part of it where instantly it breaks, and now you're spending so much time doing this one thing where you're realizing I could be doing many other things, but no, I'm taking forever on this one little thing that, for all intents and purposes, seems totally out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a good example is usually whenever this is the one. For context on this one, my brother has started playing the Assassin's Creed games, and he's really enjoying it. Though I do have a swear jar every time he complains about one, because I want to hear it. He complains every time about the follow missions, because it always seems to be like it seems to go at a different pace than the rest. Because he likes to move fast, but now he has to go grind to a halt following someone where, honestly, he knows the location. He could just go there and not follow that person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those, we've all experienced them. We've all felt them. It's still happening nowadays, so much as we don't like them.
I know people like to give a special exception to Resident Evil 4, but if I'm being honest, I will not have a whole lot of nice things to say about escort missions in general.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Escort missions was one of the things that I was going to bring up.
Actually, I was just thinking about it myself. That's the problem. Like, all the ones I could think of, I don't. People beat me to it.
I just said escorts because it was like, it is the. I think pretty sure you all can agree. Like, the arbitrary escort mission is like the biggest pace breaker you can ever put in a game.
Yeah, when it comes to pace in a stealth action game, that's where things get a little bit tricky because they're kind of meant to be going at a slower pace.
Most certainly, but I'm usually like you get a mission, you get some kind of quest, regardless of what it is, but it doesn't fit the tone that most of the game has had for a while.
I can actually think of a offshoot of that as well when it comes to pace breakers. Forced stealth sections in non-stealth games.
Hi, Wind Waker. How you doing?
Oh yeah, prime example right there. That forced stealth section in Wind Waker. Fuck that noise.
Hi, anytime you have to play Ashley in RE4.
High Sacred Realm in Skyward Sword.
We seem to
No,
be
the
picking
Sacred
on
Realms aren't
Zelda a
that
lot
bad.
tonight.
Yeah, Zelda seems to be
Okay,
embodying a lot
so
of these
the
problems.
Sacred Realms in Skyward Sword, that isn't a forced stealth mission. That's a collectathon avoiding obstacles.
Avoiding obstacles, and some of them are in places where you have no choice but to take the L. You got either get caught, or they are placing an area where no matter what, you're going to get caught and you're going to get killed.
Well, and that's different than it being a forced stealth section. It's like I said, it's a collectathon with obstacles, and that's really it.
Yeah. No, I think a better example of a forced stealth section outside of Wind Waker, but it's also still a Zelda game. It's a smaller one. Ocarina of Time. When you first tried to invade Castle Hyrule,
Ah, yeah.
you have to dodge the guards.
And that one's stupid.
That one
It is.
And granted, it comes back again, but it was kind of implied already. But even then, it's still unnecessary when you got to go to the Gerudo Fortress.
No, the Gerudo Fortress one is it'll just send you back to start instead of kicking you out entirely. But I got a few mechanics on my head here. First one, and this is not going to sound like a big one until I explain it. Actions being performed when a button is let go. And let me explain that. There are a lot of actions in video games where you have to press down the button and hold it and then let go for the action to finish. Like when you press down a button to pick up a rock and then aim and then let go of the button to make it throw. That's fine. I'm talking about something that specifically has killed a lot of people playing Elden Ring. That your roll doesn't happen until you let go of the button. Because the dash is on the same button. And so they want you to be able to dash by pressing down on the button. And the thing is, this could have been much more easily dealt with by just giving a small input delay to check press versus hold. But that's not what they did. They did press is going to cause you to start running, and that you only roll if you let go. That type of mechanic that makes everything unintuitive and sets you off syncopation for the type of game that you're playing completely ruins how good play feels. So it's a very specific type of button usage, and I fucking hate it. I literally picked up a mod for Elden Ring to give me hold is dash, press is roll. Because fuck that.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's more of a general problem of just better input mapping.
I guess you could put it under a broader umbrella, but this is a very specific issue because most of the time you don't have that type of issue. You just have like maybe where the buttons actually are doesn't make a lot of sense to you, and there are a lot of games that are giving full custom control pad mapping these days. Hi, Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin, it does that. But it's very specifically the way actions work with the button.
Actually, going off that, I don't know if it would count as an in-game one, but would button mapping count?
I will count it in one particular type of case. And that is where the button mapping requires you to hold a controller in unorthodox ways. Yes, I'm bringing up the crab hands that I had to deal with all those years with Armored Core, and I'm hoping we don't have to deal with that again when 6 comes out in August.
I don't think it will. I'm pretty sure they've learned from both the couple of guys that have left them and worked on Demon X Machina and from their other competitors.
Mm-hmm.
But button mapping or control schemes that require unorthodox and uncomfortable hand positions. Hello, Claw. Hello, PSP. Hello, Freedom Unite.
I was also thinking, like, just... And this one... This is why I'm curious about it. Because... What if, like, too many actions or such programmed to one single button?
Well, it depends. It depends on if all the actions can occur simultaneously or not. That's going to be a situational thing. Like,
I was thinking Kirby's Epic Air Ride.
That'd be a pretty specific example. In most cases, when multiple actions are mapped to the same button, those actions cannot happen simultaneously. Such as, I don't know, using triangle for both interact and look.
Oh yeah.
You could change it by making it how they hold the button or anything like that. That's a hypothetical. I will say that if we're going to go with button mapping as the basis, the pet peeve would be not allowing custom mapping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a big one for me. I love custom mapping. And when they don't allow it, I get fucking pissed.
Granted, it's again, not so much an issue nowadays, but it's like back in the day where you have like 2-3 buttons depending on 3-4 buttons to use depending on what console you're using. And just sometimes you're going for one thing and you press the wrong button on accident and it ruins the entire thing, you get killed.
Well, that's more...
But you know what? But again,
I know what you're saying, but at that point, that's user error, and that's not something that's covered.
oh yeah.
Here's one for you, and even though I love the video game I'm going to bring up as the example of this, it's still something that fucking pisses me off. Having to recollect your maximum power every mission. Hello, Wonderful 101.
Yep.
I love you so much, but having to recollect every fucking Wonderful One to get back to 100 members until you unlock all of the permanent members, because you're randomly collecting citizens and temporarily deputizing them with the Wonderliner to up your power. But once you have all of the Wonderful Ones in the game, you never have to worry about it again. Allegedly.
I played that. I know what you're talking about.
No, but any game where every mission you have to recollect... I mean... where you have to recollect every power up to get back to your maximum strength. And I suppose to a lesser extent that can also be for games in a series. Like the most common trope that I see brought up here is, why does Samus lose her powers every Metroid game? I mean, I'm going to be honest. Nintendo has done a really good job explaining that in more modern games. Especially with things like Zero Mission and Fusion and Dread, about why she loses her powers. Hell, in Dread, as much as I gave Dread a scrub because of the lack of a action game mechanic that is vital to action games, it did a great job explaining why she comes down to the planet with her powers. You actually get to play her with her powers for just a couple minutes. And then she gets attacked and they all get stripped from her. It actually explains it.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for it in that one, and that's good. But the bigger pet peeve for me is when it's per mission rather than per game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's annoying. All right, let me throw out one here. I would say there's also certain level mechanics that can be a pain. And the two big ones that I think everyone's probably thinking of when I bring up level mechanics: underwater levels and ice levels.
Oh yeah, no. Nobody I know has anything nice to say about them, and I know we've been picking on Zelda a lot, but there is one that I cannot let pass.
Water Temple.
Water Temple.
Water Temple.
The one that was so bad even Nintendo was like, yeah, that was a mistake.
Water Temple was good. These guys don't know what they're talking about.
True story for me. True story for me. First time I played Ocarina of Time, and I got to that fucking water temple. I did everything I could to get through that temple. I had no idea there was a switch at the bottom of the temple to drain the water enough to get to what I needed to get to. Or that there was a chest down there at the bottom, having the last key that I needed. That was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
At least you didn't do the thing where if you use the small keys in the wrong order, you permanently lock out the temple and have to restart the game.
Actually, I ended up restarting the game anyway.
But you didn't lock yourself to that point.
But yeah, so these have two very similar but different mechanics involved.
Mm-hmm.
Underwater levels are often very slow because you're supposed to be swimming. It's a slog to get through most of these. Some games avoid the water mechanics to a degree. Mega Man 2, I think, is a great one with Bubble Man stage. The water mechanics aren't there to slow you down. They just give you some extra jump height, and the slowness isn't that big a deal. But then, you want to come to the most egregious example of a water level? The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES.
Yeah.
That goddamn dam!
Mm-hmm.
Swimming through that sea, swimming to avoid the seaweed that is literally all over the fucking place.
I don't
That
know why the
shocks
seaweed
you every...
It was dumb that they even made the seaweed damage you.
Yeah. And then there's not to mention those, whatever the fuck those vine-looking things were that grab you and insta-kill you. And then, on top of all that, you're on a fucking time limit! Yeah, that one's pretty bad. And then you have any game involving ice physics. And...
Depends on how it's implemented in the game. There have been games where the ice physics are really good.
That's true.
That is true, but I think it's like everyone playing a platformer, and you have those sections where you have to be crisp with it.
Yeah, where you have to know how the mechanics work for the ice physics and be able to utilize it, because otherwise you're just slipping all over the place and falling on your ass half the time. It annoys the fuck out of anybody who has to deal with that shit.
Yeah, and since you mentioned you mentioned water levels. Since we've been picking on Zelda so much, allow me to pick on Mario for once.
Yay! Which game?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Admittedly, the water physics in the 2D era, the water physics aren't really the problem. The problem more often ends up being the enemies in the water,
Who have better movement than you do because they're usually fish and shit.
Yeah.
I forget the name, but there is one type of fish that we saw in Mario World where they like showing up in groups. They like doing absolutely nothing until you get close, and then they start bum rushing you.
Van Winkles.
Oh, yeah.
They're called Van Winkles. They're named after Rip Van Winkle.
Yep.
Yeah, the Van Winkles. Those annoying fuckers. Now, I give Mario World a bit of a pass because there are ways to get around the water physics. Namely, if you're holding a block in your hand, you just suddenly jet off.
Mm-hmm.
Alternatively, there's having fire flower powers because everything just dies.
Yes. There's that too. So there's ways around it.
Since you mentioned fire flower, I have to ask the same question that Korone asked. Water and fire. Why?
What kinds of fire? What kinds of fire? What
Gotta
the
love
fuck?
Korone.
But
No,
there's one bigger one that anybody who's played Mario Kart has had to suffer through, and that is, I think it was Bloopas, who just do whatever the fuck they want.
Yep.
Bloopers? Yeah, the squids.
Bloopers.
Yep.
The little... Yep. Those annoying bastards. No. You want to talk about a Mario game that had horrible water mechanics? Let's talk about Mario 64.
Are we going to bring up the eel?
Of course we're going to bring up the fucking eel. I mean, that's part of it. It's not the only thing bad about the water mechanics there, but it's part of it.
Now, I do have to stop us from going too far after we mentioned the eel and dire docks. But it's very clear that Nintendo learned from its past mistakes and made water traversal better and better game after game.
Oh, I agree. Agreed.
One need only look at Super Mario Odyssey for that one. Oh
Yes.
man.
Oh, that
Although
thing
there
was
is-
glorious.
This is semi-related, but there is one other thing that is a case of whoever put this in Mario 64 is a dick.
I know what he's gonna say.
Let me guess.
Who
Flight
knows?
mechanics.
Nope. I know what he's gonna say. Who else knows?
He's gonna be his pants.
No, hold on, Monk. Let me give them a hint. Beethoven.
That fucking piano. Like, I appreciate it. I appreciate it in a game recognizes game kind of thing, but also fuck you.
I should not be having a jump scare in a Mario game.
Dun, dun, dun,
No,
dun.
you see, those are more suitable for Luigi games.
Yes. Yes, because at least the game's designed around the whole idea of being spooky. Not in Mario 64. I don't care if it's Boo's house. Fuck you.
Okay. I had one. I had one and I lost it.
I do have one that leans a little bit more in the realm of grand strategy games.
Oh boy.
And that is AI negotiations.
Hi, I'm Nuclear Ngandi. Nice to meet you.
Yep. You had to bring up civilization.
I mean, that's where it all comes from.
All hail the blessed nukes of Gandhi.
Yeah, you have that. You have Montezuma being a complete dickbag.
No.
Must be a day that ends in
See,
Y.
that's the real Montezuma's revenge, not diarrhea.
Yeah. But and of course there is every single diplomacy mechanic in every Total War game. Period.
Yeah, diplomacy mechanics against the AI doesn't really tend to work.
Or you end up with situations where your allies are declaring war against each other. Because that's always fun.
Yeah.
Or the game of diplomacy is pay them enough stuff and then they like you. That's not really diplomacy.
That's called bribery.
Well, like, if you look at a game like Endless Space 2, most of the time, if you want to make any sort of alliance with anybody, you just have to give them enough stuff so that they like you enough, and then they'll usually say, okay, let's have an alliance. It's bullshit.
Again, that's not diplomacy, that's bribery.
Tautology.
Anyway, I got hell now, guys.
All right, man.
All right,
Stay
later, Rick.
frosty.
Night.
All right. Also, another good one that they've tried so many times, especially in the PS3 era. They really tried to push this. Good old morality choice systems.
Yeah, we did kind of dip into that when we talked about when we covered Mass Effect some time ago, but I do maintain that it was quite fitting that after Mass Effect 3 we stopped hearing about that.
We still have some form of reputation systems, but reputation is much more open-ended than morality.
Yeah.
One of the big failings with the morality choice approach that was often done is one, a lot of people it underestimated the fact that a lot of people will do things in games just to see what happens, which is something Undertale outright called out. But You also have the fact that in a lot of cases the game is forcing you to choose between either being Hitler or Mother Teresa in the most extreme measures possible. And yeah, I'm ripping off Yahtzee with that one, but if the boot fits, there's
it's if the game is designed to have a middle ground somewhere that you can work with that has a satisfactory conclusion to it, sure, great, all right, we're getting somewhere. But most games didn't have that. Most games were like you might as well have either gone just completely good or completely evil, because anything in between, there's nothing.
This is the reason why, oddly enough, I think the Megami Tensei games have had it down pat for years. Instead of trying to do some good or evil morality setup, you have two major factions that represent law and chaos: the Gaia cult and the Messiah cult. But usually the best ending is rejecting both of them.
We went into this in detail when we designed our own Persona game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the Gaia cult tends to represent law, but a lot of members within the Gaia cult are borderline anarchists. Whereas the Messiah cult, which tends to represent order, they are often folks who are borderline authoritarians. In some cases, they actually are authoritarians. And
I've got one.
Shoot.
Multiple resource management in games that are not about resource management.
Yeah. I'd say that's going to be a bit broad, but I'd say the big case of that is when that resource management feels like busy work. But what specifically did you have in mind?
So, actually, this is going to be a deep cut for some people. In the game Alliance Alive, the Alliance Alive originally for the 3DS and eventually on PC. You have your gold, which is fine and dandy. But you have two other resources as well. Ordarium gems and Chaosium gems. And you mentioning Law and Chaos brought this up to my brain. Ordarium gems are a resource exclusively for retrying or fleeing from battles. And Chaosium gems are used to buy equipment you cannot get anywhere else until you level up your various alliance towers to certain levels. And even then, if you don't get them from the Chaosium shop in the first place, the blueprints for them won't show up in the blacksmith tower a lot of the time. This is a very big particular pet peeve for mine, especially because you can't level up all of the towers to maximum on a new game. You have to do New Game Plus to get everything in the game. And I suppose we can extend my whole multiple resources to manage in a game that is not about resource management to also be any game that does not allow you to get 100% of the things in a single run.
Mm-hmm.
Forcing a New Game Plus to get everything except when it makes sense. Because I'm making an exception here for things like Nier Automata because it made sense as like the story was actually made around those New Game Pluses. So that's a different idea. That was a narrative addition to that mechanic. But ultimately, having to juggle multiple resources in a game where the focus is not about juggling multiple resources, like you're not playing, say, a city builder or any resource management sim to speak of,
mm-hmm.
it does become busy work. Keeping track of, and especially with the example I used, the Alliance Alive, Chaosium gems are limited, and so are Ordarium gems, and you have to find them. You can't buy them or anything. You have to find them. So getting these resources that are necessary for you to do certain things in the game, it becomes this slog of looking for them or finding the one enemy, the one like world boss you have to kill to get some of them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that could get annoying. Ooh, good one for you. We talked about hand braking earlier. Well, let's go to the other end of that. Hand holding.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it came to tutorials. Now, having a tutorial, a quick tutorial for certain things, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes the games have a lot of mechanics, and you want to teach people how to use those mechanics. That's perfectly fine. And some games could integrate the tutorial into the gameplay. Hi, Mega Man X, how the fuck you doing?
Yep, yet another time of when Ego Raptor was actually good.
But
sequelitis.
Yeah, but a lot of the games in the 2000s and the 2010s really shoved the tutorials down your throat for the longest time with these like sometimes near hour-long tutorials. Prime example, Kingdom Hearts 2. Good fucking Christ, that was a long-ass tutorial. It got so bad that we brought up Undertale earlier. I mean, they literally made a character whose whole gimmick was she was holding your hand throughout the tutorial section.
And her name is Tutorial.
Well, yeah. Toriel. But yeah, that was the joke.
That was the joke.
I actually, fun fact, when I did my Let's Play of Undertale, I tried to see if I could hint to Maddie and T-Dub about that. Like, what would happen if you had double of Toriel? And they didn't get it. It took them a minute to finally realize what the fuck I was trying to tell them.
You have tutorials.
Yeah.
See, you get it.
Of course I get it, but I also know the joke.
That's fair.
It's not not fair to use someone who already has pre-knowledge as an indicator of baseline.
Fair enough. But the point I'm getting at is that, those kind of super long-ass, boring tutorials, you just want to play the fucking game. You know? Teach me what I need to know quickly as possible, and let me get to the fun part.
How about let's take hand-holding in a different direction? Father, I think you can push this log!
Oh yeah.
Shut up, boy.
The kind of thing that has annoyed me with open world style games for almost a decade now.
Either a companion character or your own character constantly talking to themselves about maybe I can do X. I can see the ledge is painted. I know where to climb. God damn it!
This kind of thing really got brought up when a developer at Ubisoft and a UI developer at Guerrilla Games, and I may be cross-wiring the two, but I don't give a fuck, got really salty about the UI design in Elden Ring. And somebody made this glorious image of what Elden Ring would look like if it was designed by Guerrilla Games or by Ubisoft, and just had all this obnoxious material on it.
Obnoxious HUD material, microtransaction reminders, and then at the bottom it says the Tarnished. I think I can follow the golden light to that castle over there.
Oh. hang on. I'm not sure if you have seen the image, so I'm going to share it with you in Council Shades.
I might have seen this in the past. Let me see. Oh god, yeah. Oh god, that's disgusting. That is disgusting. Or how about again? We go back to Kingdom Hearts for a quick minute. How often Goofy and Donald were telling you could cast certain spells when you already knew you could do that?
Get up on the Hydra's back.
I mean, granted that that's a game more geared to younger audiences to an extent, so I can kind of understand, but still, give us the option to turn that shit off.
And there are good games that do that. Actually, where let me put it this way, going back to our recent monastic therapy with Forspoken, there was an option to turn off the chatter between Cuff and Frey, except for story events only. Which would cause her to stop saying things about what she had to do, or how she could cast her magic, or any of that. Which, got a little annoying sometimes when I heard it while playing the game, but I liked keeping the chatter on normal because I also liked hearing them talk to each other about random bullshit as well. But
Yeah.
having an option like that, hell yes. And Dark, as for making protagonists silent, we have a whole episode about when a protagonist should be silent and when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
A silent tarnished or a silent, a silent Ashen One or any of those makes sense because it's supposed to be a blank slate character. But, for God of War or these other games where it's a very clear established character, we want them to be voiced.
Yeah, one of the big examples we used was Corvo Atano in Dishonored.
He absolutely should have had a voice. He should not have been silent.
And the big reason for that is the idea of a silent protagonist is to be a blank slate for the player to inhabit. The problem is Corvo is not a blank slate. He has a place within the setting of a place of prominence, and it also makes conversations awkward when people are talking to you and you're not giving any response back.
Yep. Corvo was a master assassin, bodyguard, and consort to the Empress Josephine herself. There's a lot to it.
Mm-hmm. But since we're on the subject of tutorials, I want to go a semi-opposite route. A mix between tutorials and handbraking. And that is tutorials that only give you the basics, but don't give you the actual mechanics that are going to be important. Where you're just given the basic controls that you might see on those splash screens for a demo, which I don't mind those splash screens in a demo because, well, it's a demo. You're only going to be playing it for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But this is an issue that for the longest time I had with fighting games, though more recent stuff, especially by people like ArcSys, have mitigated this problem. And that is only giving you the basic controls of how to move, how to punch, how to kick, how to throw, how to block, but not giving you the actual mechanics of how each fighter works.
Yep.
And how to put that in practice.
Street Fighter, with Capcom and Street Fighter, and with ArcSys and their games, probably around the time of Street Fighter 4, I'm going to say, they started offering a lot of what are basically called like the fighter trials or fighter challenges, where it taught you things like your target combos, your bread and butters. It taught you how to link up things. And sure, it's all happening on a stationary or jumping target or anything like that, just so that you'd have the right, situation for the type of combo you're going for. But it would give you the basic understanding of how the character links its stuff together.
I would say the first game to really hammer home the idea of getting players to understand its mechanics beyond just the basics was Blaze Blue.
Mm-hmm. Blaze Blue had the character target challenges.
Mm-hmm. And 3D fighters like Dead or Alive or Tekken have had combo challenges for years.
Yeah.
But this is something that it's starting to become common practice when it comes to fighters. I do think that there's other genres that this needs to be a common practice because it would go a long way to fixing the toxicity problem that their developers keep bitching about. And that of course being things like MOBAs.
Mm.
I talked about this on Saturday with you Shades, but I maintained that the toxicity problem you're seeing in Overwatch and League is a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah.
By sheer virtue of not having a proper tutorial system or even proper bots. We've had bot matches in shooters for over 20 years.
I think the earliest is Quake, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, Quake.
Because I was like, it's not Unreal, even though Unreal's been around for a while. It's got to be Quake.
Yeah. Well, given that Quake is pretty much the father of death matching,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Quake had bot matches, and and they were easy to set up. Unreal stepped it up because of the more advanced AI that Unreal had at the time.
Man, I still remember playing the first Unreal tournament, modded on a PC. Man, those mods are still good.
And well, you know how we've joked about the John Romero ad for Daikatana? The perfect counter argument to that sort of advertising is what was used for the first Unreal. It's called Unreal because it is.
That was good marketing, but that's a bit rails there, Monk. No, Monk. I have one, but I think it might fall on external if we're being technical.
All right, let's see how pedantic we have to be for this one.
Developers retroactively removing the ability for community modifications to work.
Yeah, I think that falls more in line with the external mechanics.
I'm pretty sure too. I just wanted to bring it up because it fucking pisses me off every time. I had to get it out as I was thinking about it.
Oh, I'm not disputing that for a minute.
No. Actually, I got a better one that is absolutely an internal mechanic.
Go for it.
Excessive QuickTime events.
I am so glad that
Hi Shenmue, how are you?
Let's see, I'd say those obviously got really egregious in the 7th generation, and as much as people talk about Resident Evil 4 being the quote unquote perfect game, it isn't. I have never been a fan of the QuickTime events in that game, especially since they have a very short failure window.
Yep. For all intents and purposes, Shenmue's QuickTime events basically turned the game into an FMV.
And given the kind of game that Shenmue was intended to be, I can see why it would take that route. That doesn't mean I have to like it.
Yeah. Of course, if we're going to talk about QuickTime events, we got to mention everyone's favorite whipping boy, Mr. David Cage.
Mm-hmm.
Do we really have to? Can we
In
not
this case,
say we
yes.
Can we not say we didn't?
In this case, we kind of have to bring him up because he is the epitome, he is the personification of how bad QuickTime events can be.
Or how good they can be. Everyone should play Detroit Become Human just to laugh at how many times Connor dies.
Yeah.
I like dogs.
I still find it absolutely hilarious that line got David Cage so pissed off. But as we mentioned previously, Cage has this problem of being way too attached to his script.
Yep.
And to that end, this is going to be borderline, but I'm going to be putting in the design ethos of the majority of art games.
That is pretty borderline.
But I'm if I need to be more specific, journal entries. Earlier Rick had talked about pace breaking. Journal entries are one of those cases for me, and I'm specifically referring to those games that have the lengthy entries, even more so when it's an audio diary.
Yeah.
Because the game clearly wants you to stop and pay attention to this, and as you're doing that, you're not doing any sort of progress or really anything. It is a case of freeze tag. And as somebody who prefers a degree of forward momentum in games, that is just not tenable.
This is where you see that some of the really cool innovations for journal entries came along in games like BioShock, where it plays as an audio diary instead.
Yeah, but even those can get a bit lengthy, and BioShock's audio diaries were building upon System Shock. What I will give credit to, however, is the fact that you can always go back and listen to these kind of things again.
Yes. In an off moment, if what you want to do is just catch up on some lore, you can go back and do it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when it comes to narrative, I will freely admit that the I do think it's telling that the dialogue wheel has not lasted.
Yeah, dialogue options.
And I'm perfectly fine with dialogue options. But the problem is you can end up with what Lore Runner has called the Tor effect, where the option that you pick and what you say, and this is something we've talked about in the past, do not match.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the fact that they don't match, you can end up sounding like an unintentional asshole when that wasn't what you wanted to do in the first place.
Yeah.
But and I will how would one particular controversy that came up when Lost Ark came out in the States, that I can see why people had an issue with it, but I personally don't, and that is locking certain classes off based on character gender.
I mean, Terra did that too.
Yeah,
it's mostly been MMOs from what I've seen.
Yeah, I don't hate the concept. I can understand why some people have an issue with it. It ultimately depends on the type of game that is trying to be made.
Yeah. I've got one for you. because we've kicked it down so many times before. I'm surprised we hadn't brought it up yet. Open world games, the map you have to reveal by hitting specific reconnaissance points, aka the UB box formula. I'm surprised we hadn't brought it up yet. And I'm going to give a direct contrast to it in the form of Hogwarts Legacy. The map slowly reveals as you go around through it. As you get close to certain activities, they get marked on the map. And you can use the Revelio spell, which is basically your radar in the game, to see activities at a distance, but they aren't marked on the map till you get closer. But there's no reveal point you have to go to. And you aren't blocked off from any part of the map by missions, and you don't have to you can just you can uncover the map at your own pace in your own way, essentially. But the Ubi Box formula, as cool as, say, Watch Dogs' idea was, and again, we're dealing directly with Ubi at this point, and as understandable as it was that you had to connect into a local server cluster to get specifics about the region. Honestly, because GPS is a thing in the modern day, what should have happened is the entire map should have been revealed as just like a general map so you could see roads and stuff and use them to navigate normally. And then when you hacked into a CTOS center, you got the specifics of that area. That would have been a much better way to implement that, but they didn't. Mm-hmm. Not in any version of Watch Dogs.
Yeah.
Of course, the sequels to Watch Dogs had other problems.
Hi, Watchdog Legion.
Mm-hmm. I do remember trying out
2.
Trying out 2 a bit, finding it kind of and then trying out Legion and really not liking it. And apparently Legion ended up sucking so much that the only way it got interesting was by bringing in Fox. You know your game sucks. You know your work sucks when in order to get some attention, you got to bring in the guys from the past games.
Yep.
And
Here's an interest. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I could make a wrestling reference with that, but that'd be a little bit too obvious.
Actually, I got another one for you. Necessary excessive grinding in RPG-style games. You know, if you want to grind, you can grind, but forcing your players to grind their ass off to get past an arbitrary point because it's too difficult at their current level, even though you've been playing everything properly, you fought in every battle you've been in, you've been gaining levels, oh, but you're still not strong enough. You have to go out and kill like 100, 500 of these guys in order to get enough levels to get to the next point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly a case, and I'd say a lot of that is an artifact of the old Dragon Quest days.
Yeah.
Oh, now that we're speaking about the old Dragon Quest days, non-action RPGs where you cannot control your party members. Like, action RPGs, I can understand. Maybe you just want to focus on the one character that you control and everybody else has their own AI routines. Makes perfect sense. But a non-action RPG where you can't control your other party member companions? Fuck that. I always hated that about old Dragon Quest.
To that end, where would you put some of the Persona games on that?
Same. I believe we were talking at Persona 3 and earlier, right? Because you can control your party members in Persona 3, if I remember correctly.
In Persona 3, no. I think you could do it in. I think you can do it in Fez, but I haven't played Fez in a while.
I haven't either.
4, I think you could only. I think the first case where it was a mainline where you could control the whole party was 5. It's either 4 or 5.
I'm pretty sure it was 4. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong. Mm-hmm. I completely admit that I could be wrong. We haven't picked on them enough tonight, and I don't know why we haven't. We usually do. But I'm going to use them as the example for these two things. Procedurally generated quests. Hello, Bethesda.
Yeah, and I'd also throw in the insistence on procedural generation
in general.
Yeah, because on some level I don't have too much problem with it, but one of the issues that ends up coming up when you're dealing with procedural generation is you are unable to create set pieces. You're unable to create create certain levels or certain experiences with the sandbox.
Unless you make those experiences a part of what can be like a thing that is procedurally generated as a unit itself.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you end up with these really weird-ass results.
Well, I'll point out a game that does procedural generation with its set pieces as parts, as individual units within the generation itself. FTL. Some of the set pieces within the game are randomly generated, but it's like the whole set piece is a single unit. It's not like all the pieces are generated, but it's like you... If I had to make it an example using a building block analogy, with the random generation, most of the stuff is just someone randomly putting down individual blocks. But certain things programmed within the random generation are to treat an entire structure like a castle as a single block. So that thing will be placed as part of random generation. But the castle itself is not randomly generated.
Yeah. Bethesda's my whipping boy when it comes to their procedural generation because whether it be in Skyrim or in Fallout, you have long, long stretches of nothing, except for some occasional bandit caves. And even
Well,
then,
hell,
there's so many times you can do the same damn bandit cave without it getting annoying.
hell, the thing in the thing about Bethesda's procedural generation is it's not even the setting; it's just the quests. Also, Monk, before I forget, I need to tell you another settlement needs our help.
Fuck off. I hate him as much as I hate Otis in Dead Rising.
I had to. It was there. It was already fermenting on the ground. I had to give it to you. Gosh, what else? There's a lot of stuff. Let me just go look at my let me go look at my list of games here for a second.
Yeah, I will say, since we've talked about console style RPGs quite a bit, let's talk about forced loss battles.
Ah.
I don't mind them if there is a way to win, and if you win, it does something special.
Problem
Even
is,
if it changes, even if it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In a lot of cases, you don't.
This is true, but I mean, if you manage to win, and all it is, oh, I'm not using my real power, and it changes some lines of dialogue, makes you seem a little cooler as a character, that's fine. I mean, Alliance Alive is actually a good example of a forced loss battle, Monk. At the very beginning of the game, at the end of Chapter 2, I think it is, you have two characters. And those two characters are not very strong. They're very low strength characters. There isn't a traditional level system to the game, so that's not why I'm saying low level. And you encounter a very high power character who beats you down, and it's part of the game's tutorial to teach you how to use a specific mechanic in the game too. But on New Game Plus, you'll usually have a lot of leftover stuff from the new game, from your first game, to power yourself up to the point that you can take out that character. And if you do, the game just ends there. You get a good ending at the very beginning of the game.
Mm-hmm. I know that Far Cry has had a history of there being a very easy way to get to end the game.
So it's not a history per se. They did it with 4 as an Easter egg, really. You sit there and wait the 15 minutes he asks you to wait, and then he comes back, y'all do stuff, you put your mother's ashes away, and that's that.
And then because 5 too.
No. Because they did it in 4, it started becoming an expected thing, so they did it in 5. But in 5, it's not a good ending.
Well, I don't plan on doing a full thing on Star Frontier. Not Starfront. What am I saying? On Far Cry. Because mostly because the big problem that it has is Far Cry is a victim of its own success. It managed to strike gold with one particular avenue all those years ago with Voss, and has been trying to repeat that every single entry since.
Have I ever told you the definition of insanity?
And the problem is you end up having a law of diminishing returns. It was kind of amusing where with 5 people got really pissy because apparently because it was taking place in Montana, they expected it to focus on current year politics. And Dark brings up the Asylum Demon in DS1. I would say yes. He also brings up un or under-supported weapon styles. I think that's a bit of a stretch.
That's a subjective thing.
Yeah. And truth be told, when it comes to on one hand, I can understand wanting to put sound weapons, and I can definitely understand putting in fist weapons, monk. But in some games, I can understand the logistical problems with adding a whole new weapon avenue. especially if it's a game that isn't going to quite fit it. I'm not going to ask for more melee weapons in a shooter, for instance. I might ask that the ones that are available don't just be an emergency button. Like say anytime you have to use your fists in some old school shooters. Doom is the exception to this, because if you know what you're doing, you can play fisticuffs as a way to save ammo, especially if you get a berserk pack. But I know we've picked on Zelda quite a bit with this, but why do you, if you guys had to guess, why do you suppose it is that Zelda has so many of these ones that we've railed on? Or do you think it's just coincidence?
I don't think it's coincidence, but I also don't think it's intentional.
Yeah, I get the feeling they were often, Zelda and a lot of Nintendo games often were groundbreaking and testing the waters on a lot of new things. Like, Nintendo was one of the first ones to really bust out into 3D with Mario 64, which is why it had its things, and they hadn't quite figured out the problems with running in 3D by the time Zelda came around, so a lot of those mechanics hadn't really been proven to be a problem until those games came out.
And it's not even just that. Zelda from the very beginning has been very experimental as the games go on. The Super Mario formula has been somewhat experimental, but if you look at what you could consider the quote-unquote mainline games, I don't really know if Mario has a mainline. The focus has always really been core right back to the platforming. It's about the platforming. Sure, if we go to the newest entry of Odyssey, it's a wide, expansive, explorable levels, but it's still the platforming. I mean, there are some fucking kick-ass little tricks you can pull off with the way the platforming works in the game now, but it's still all platforming skill. The Legend of Zelda has changed time and again. It's been an adventure game for the most part. You're having an adventure in each one, doing something adventurous, searching through a land, finding different places, fighting different bosses. But it has been an adventure game primarily. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's been experimenting with how to change that adventure. Even from Zelda 1 to Zelda 2, there's a great difference to adventuring on the world map versus when you're in the action stages, where it's side-scrolling shmup, essentially. Except it's a one-layer shmup. And then you keep going on to, we get the top-down semi-isometric view of Link to the Past, which became a big bread and butter for the 2D and 2.5D Zelda games, even up to very recently with things like Triforce Heroes or A Link Between Worlds. And in the 3D games, you also have different ways of exploring how the adventure can go. Yes, with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, they were both very, very similar because, well, one came right off the coattails of the other. But then with Wind Waker, first of all, you're in the fucking sea. And oh my god, do not get me fucking started about how much I hate that. There's another pet peeve. Wide open worlds you do not have a faster way to travel through.
I know some will argue, but that fast travel ends up shortening the scale of the world, but at some point the atmosphere of the world just becomes a hindrance.
Yeah.
There is a reason that the Wind Waker remaster got the Swift Sail. Because they understood that so many people basically gave up the game because of the Triforce hunt and how slow it was. But going back to why we've been picking on Zelda so much, because they experiment with implementation in nearly every game. Wind Waker, different from Twilight Princess, different from Skyward Sword, different from Breath of the Wild. And you see the same thing with the 2.5D games. Even though they're building off of the same understandable building blocks, They do different things with them. I mean, even if you just take a look at Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds side by side, yes, it's the same fucking Hyrule in both games. That's actually the same fucking Hyrule. But all the mechanics that you're using in A Link Between Worlds are shifted and changed because of the 2D mechanic that allows you to paint Link up onto walls and stuff. So, since they're constantly experimenting with implementation, they're going to get a lot of hits, and they're going to get misses. So a lot of the things we've picked on are the misses. Going back to the water temple example that I was going to make more fun of, but we moved on beyond. The water temple on the original 64 cartridge is the one temple in the game where if you do not do it right, you cannot advance. And if you haven't, say, saved your game in both slots on the or one of two slots, it had 3. If you hadn't saved your game in more than one slot on the cartridge, which is actually quite likely in the 90s, maybe you had a save, and your sibling had a save, and your best friend had a save, because not everybody had their own consoles and their own cartridges. All of a sudden, you can't save over anybody else's, and then you use a small key in the wrong place at the wrong time in the water temple, and there's no way to get to the next small key to unlock the door you need to unlock. That is a hard lock on the game. And if you didn't save before starting the water temple, wherever your save back was, that was where you'd have to go back to. Or if you had saved after doing that, not knowing you'd lock yourself out, you had to start the game over. And it's in the first remake of Ocarina of Time for the GameCube, the Master Quest version, where they fixed that by putting an extra key elsewhere. Again, these misses are going to happen because of implementation, especially with how varied implementation has been in The Legend of Zelda. And so, like I said, I don't think it's coincidence, but I don't think it's intentional. Mm-hmm. It's just law of numbers at that point.
Yeah. Now, one that I will freely admit is more of a personal one, but when it comes to, I do not care for traps in RPG design. I know I've brought this up a lot when it comes to TTRPG design, but it is just as much of an issue in video games. Some of them more than others, especially when you have some sort of free-form advancement, or you're advancing on skills or something like that. There's always going to be certain skills that just feel like they're there as a trick. If one of the more obvious examples would be swimming in Deus Ex.
That's not true. With the high enough swimming, you can go get which super weapon was it in the fucking sewers?
Even that's kind of a stretch, because you're dealing with a long amount of time where you're putting those points into things that aren't going to be as useful.
Mm-hmm.
But consider games that have some sort of skill tree, and the times where there's some skill that is completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones I'm specifically referring to.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think that with a lot of, actually, you know what? Let me get, since I'm on the topic of console style RPGs, I always am not a fan of games that decide to put in a monster whose sole purpose is to inflict debilitating debuffs.
You don't like the Marlboro?
Fuck the Marlboro, and fuck Zubat.
No.
See, I like the Marlboro.
I can at best tolerate the Marlboro, except in 8, where you needed to encounter them a lot if you wanted to get if you wanted to get the best equipment. Because
Yeah, but there
Marlboro
was easy ways to make yourself immune to status with junctioning, though.
Yeah, you could, and granted, it's something you're gonna have to deal with because everybody thinks Eden makes the game easy. No, Doom Train does.
No, Kiraga and Ultima do. Equip yourself with full stacks of Kiraga into HP Junction and Ultima into Strength Junction, and you'll never fucking lose.
But but the Zubats are the ones that are the more egregious because with
Confusion.
it's not just confusion, but the fact that they're always in the caves all the damn time. I think in one generation, I want to say Gen 5, but don't quote me on that, they didn't show up.
Yeah, but bats are supposed to be in caves, right, Monk?
There are other animals in caves as well.
Like bears.
Yes. And having it that's the only one that you have to that you deal with all the damn time is ridiculously annoying.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that.
But when I refer to loadouts and the like that end up being useless, that's obviously going to happen when you have a bunch of moving parts. But you can at least have it where you could see that playstyle being utilized, especially if you're going to be giving players that much freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I am. Diablo has had its fair share of those, and there's been a fair bit of that in MMOs as well. Of just this one particular kit or ability, and where you're like, why is this in here?
You listen to Asmongold, he'll tell you it's Ret Paladin, but you didn't hear that from me.
And obviously fighting games have had that one character who's kind of a joke. And I do want to make clear, I don't have anything against enemies that are focused on status effects. What I take issue with is when that's all you're dealing with for an entire dungeon.
Yeah.
Okay, so Malboros are not usually an entire dungeon.
No.
They kind of were in 15. But that dungeon was actually fun.
Well, how often did they show the amount of times that Marlboro will show up in a given game is relatively small. It's usually going to be a specific area, and that's it.
Yep.
Zubats, like I said, every single cave.
Yeah. You know, I think Dark has a good point here, though, about how players are not really given an opportunity to status affect it a lot themselves, and that's actually, I think that's a good pet peeve to bring up.
Yeah, there's been plenty of cases where you have the option to inflict status effects, but the odds of it are so low it's pointless.
Or even if you build for it to make it effective, it's not as effective as other easier to implement builds.
Mm-hmm.
Which, just so Dark knows, because he still hasn't played it yet, statuses in Elden Ring are actually really viable and really easy to get. I just figure I might give him another incentive to play the game.
Peer pressure, peer pressure, peer pressure, peer pressure.
It's mostly mechanics. It's mostly a mechanical issue for him. He needs a new computer.
Ah. All right, that part I wasn't fully aware of, so my bad.
But still, I mean, you're not wrong, peer pressure.
But I would say with a lot of the mechanics that we've mentioned, there is a theme of. Would you say that it's more of an issue of implementation, or just an issue with the mechanic in and of itself?
Depends on the mechanic we talked about. There are certain mechanics where no matter the implementation, they're just bad. And some of those are the things that we've clearly pointed out are icons of the past. For example, the password system thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a reason why password systems are going away by and large.
They've been the last time I saw one was in an early GBA game, and that game got roasted for having it.
Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, it really is implementation. Like I said, even with weapon durability at the very beginning of all this, if it's a game where it makes sense to be managing that type of resource, like a survival game, having that is a good thing. It's part of the immersion of that game. So I think in a lot of cases it really is implementation, but there are going to be certain mechanics that are just it's understandable why they existed at the time that they did because of the actual hardware limitations of games. But these days it's so anachronistic that it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
All right, real quick, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and head out. I got a busy day tomorrow.
All right,
Alrighty.
Stay frosty, man.
See you, Shades.
Good night, guys.
But I'd say one of the big codas is when you're putting a certain mechanic in your game to have an understanding of how that's going to interact with everything else.
Yeah, even we had to do some shifting and pruning as we went further developing, FF Legend, and that type of ethos is, I think, for all game creation, whether it's video games, tabletop, or otherwise. You want to make sure that you know how your mechanics interact.
Mm-hmm. Because there are times where there's mechanics that are normally end up working just fine, or work somewhat fine in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. I would like to bring up that Dark has a couple more questions regarding some mechanics, such as sections in games that are made to just be a one giant hazard themselves, such as Blight Town, or areas where your visibility is impaired to the point of being a detriment, such as the gutter. I think this is going to tie in ultimately to our coda of be aware of how these interact, and that it's going to depend on implementation.
Yeah, especially since we've talked quite a bit about mechanics that add to the experience, but there's also moments where taking away a player's kit is just as important.
Yeah. I mean, while this is a hyperbolic and somewhat comical example, in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, after you have to kill the cops while hearing their thoughts, and Raiden goes into his schizo hissy fit, you're stumbling around instead of actually running around like a cyborg ninja, and it really gives you some good narrative impact into how Raiden is feeling. Like I said, rather hyperbolic and extreme example, but probably the best example to come off on the top of my head.
And I'd say another one that ends up coming to mind is any shooter that we've played where you end up having that moment where all of your stuff is taken out.
Yep.
And you've obviously got to go get it back, but you have to deal with, you don't have the gear that you're using to make yourself into a shit wrecker.
Yep. And implemented properly, it makes it feel like there was a challenge to re-earn your badassery. Implemented improperly, it just feels like a chore.
Mm-hmm. Admittedly, what when we talked about difficulty, one that I wanted to bring up because I look at it as a case of how not to do difficult. As much as I love Ninja Gaiden, I hate vanilla Ninja Gaiden 2. And whenever I bring it up, somebody will inevitably say, "Well, Ninja Gaiden's supposed to be a hard game. What's your problem?" There is a difference between hard and cheap.
And bullshit.
Giving every single enemy a ranged attack is bullshit. Giving every single enemy a throw move with barely any signposting is bullshit.
Allowing ninjas to rapid-fire rocket launchers is bullshit.
Which is the reason why I know some people hated it, but I'm glad that with the Master Ninja Collection they used the Sigma versions. Because instead of the Gatling rocket launcher ninjas, because somebody decided to just do a swap with shuriken and rockets. Instead, they just have the standard rocket launcher where they fire it. They have to wait a few seconds before firing it again, or the volley rockets. You know, where they're firing like 8 rockets in a cone.
And yes, Dark. Issue with a lot of ice and underwater physics and levels is implementation. Even when we were discussing it, I pointed out that the difference between underwater in Mario 64 and underwater in Odyssey is so vastly different that it's night and day, and that the mechanics for underwater and ice in Mario these days is really fun to play with, because they've gotten used to knowing how that kit works. And there are other games where that also applies. So, ultimately, except for the truly anachronistic gameplay mechanics, it really boils down to know your game, know how this works in your game, and tweak it so that it's a fun part of the game. Which is why I said things like with weapon durability, like if just the Master Sword was the only thing that didn't have durability, there'd be no issue. Because the Master Sword is a medium strength weapon that you can always fall back on in case you need it. But that's not what they did.
Nope. Instead, they decided to take things the other way. But that is going to do it for this particular episode of GeekWatch. This was an interesting one to go with. We will be back here next week, and I will have some other matters, including a few returning friends. But that is and I do have a few interviews, but I'm not going to be completely swamped this week. And of course, if anything swamps me, it's going to be the rain, because I know there's the saying that April showers bring May flowers, and we're technically in May now, but I'm in the Midwest, where Mother Nature is on drugs.
It's going to be May.
Nope, not dignifying that. But that is going to do it for this week. We will be back here next week, and I may have something in the interim, so please look forward to it. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.